So welcome everybody. This is our chance to have a think about how self-directed education can actually help our family lives while we're in lockdown. We know that, this is a very challenging time for every family. I think children probably have a harder time dealing with lockdown than many of us. It's a very new experience to not see one's friends, in countries like South Africa, not be able to go to the park, not be able to do all the things that one usually does. And one of the stresses that a lot of families are also experiencing is when it comes to education. On the one hand, some schools have sent huge amounts of homework that parents are expected to force children to do. In other cases, parents just don't know what to do because they are suddenly at home with their children and worried about their children being able to spend their time in a valuable way. Even families who are practicing self-directed education already are suddenly cut off from their usual lives and resources. They can't go and socialize with friends. They can't go to museums. They can't go on outings or even participate with the shopping. So it's a very, very different situation. And our attitude to the situation will make a huge difference. And this is where, if parents are feeling under pressure and feeling inadequate or not up to the task of ensuring that their children are learning, then that adds a great deal of pressure to the family life. On the other hand, if parents are feeling confident, even enjoying the connection with their kids, then this can be a really brilliant time for building those family relationships. And there's no learning like the learning that happens in exceptional situations and crises. That's really when some of the richest learning happens. So this is an opportunity to ask questions that you may have or that you think people out there may have, so that we can just offer a little bit of inspiration and support for parents who are struggling at this time. So are there any questions that have already come up that people would like to ask? I'm going to just give you a moment to think about that and see if there's something you'd like to ask. Okay, so while people are still thinking what they might want to know, let me just say a few more things. So just want to share 3 words here. When we think of human well-being, we know that the one thing that all human beings need is, well, the 3 things that all human beings need are autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So DC and Ryan have researched this around the globe with many, many psychologists working with them, hundreds of psychologists doing many independent studies around the world. And there may be more universal human needs, but these are the 3 that we know for a fact every single human being shares these needs. And when these needs are well met, there's well-being. And when these needs are neglected or suppressed, that's when we're going to be struggling with things like anxiety and depression. So during this time of lockdown, there's quite a difference in people's experience of these 3 needs. Autonomy is obviously compromised because we can't do many of the things that we used to do. We're following orders. We're staying at home. We're staying safe. And for those of us who would be doing that anyway, that might feel autonomous. For those who are struggling with that, it can be a struggle. There's a downside to the competence because the things that we usually do and we usually manage have changed, and we're having to learn new skills. So everyone's a little bit off balance with competence. And with relatedness, it's really a double-edged sword. On the one hand, there's so much more time for families to connect. On the other hand, there's more pressure on families to connect. And depending on the balance between the introverts and the extroverts in every household, that can be bliss or it can be a real challenge indeed. So when we're thinking about self-directed education, we're always thinking about meeting these 3 needs. So that's another way to think about our needs as families during this time. So let's have a look. Has anybody got anything to ask yet? Okay, so let me keep it going with a little bit more. So if we come back to autonomy and competence and relatedness, let me just share that again. If we come back to those three words, in a school situation, these are generally all going to be compromised for the child, and this is why a lot of children experience a lot of stress at school. There's no autonomy in that the children are told what to do, when, with whom, and how. And there's very little space for them to come up with their own activities and their own ideas. Competence is constantly being undermined because there's always marking going on. And except for maybe one or two children in a class, they're going to know that they aren't as good as they could be. And the relatedness is constantly being compromised because it's very, very limited. You don't spend your time at school speaking to, playing with, and connecting. You spend your time in school holding yourself back from chatting and playing and connecting. So when children suddenly come home, there's an opportunity for them to relax and be human beings. And they may have adapted to certain expectations in the classroom, that they've learned how to cope with having their autonomy and their competence and their relatedness compromised in the classroom, given that they can relax when they get home. However, now in lockdown, it's a great pressure if they're coming home and finding that in their home space, where they expect to feel more autonomous and more competent and more related, school is intruding to a whole new level. So homework isn't anymore just an hour or two. Parents may be having to try and get the kids to do stuff in a way that they wouldn't normally do. So this can put a strain onto family life. And I think that that's where a lot of parents, we're seeing these outbursts on social media, either saying that they bless the teachers because they never knew how hard it was, and thank you to the teachers for the incredible job they do, because how on earth do you force kids to learn against their will? Not realizing that it's much easier to do when you aren't so closely related, because there's less of a relationship to damage. It's much harder to do when you're in a close relationship, to try and force someone to do something against their will without consent. It damages the relationship, which makes it very, very hard for parents. Or on the other hand, some parents are very, very resentful that they are suddenly having to be expected to achieve something that they don't know how to begin to do. And they're really experiencing the lack of consent in the normal schooling model that they don't usually experience, because usually they're not watching it live. They are not actually the primary coercers, whereas now many parents are suddenly having to take the role of being primary coercers. So in terms of that, once we go to self-directed education, we are automatically supporting autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Because once we go to self-directed education, even if it's temporary, once the parent can relax and realize that learning happens all the time, everywhere, that curriculum actually is busy work that is mostly forgotten and flushed, that skills continue to develop through life experience, and you really can't interrupt the acquisition of those skills. And the parent can feel calmer and more reassured and more supportive, then it becomes possible for children to choose their own activities and be supported in that by the parent, rather than trying to follow a set curriculum, and that builds the sense of autonomy. It also allows children to pitch their challenges to what they are ready for, which helps them to feel more competent. And it allows the parent and the child to relax together and focus on connecting and enjoying each other, rather than being in a power struggle over what has to be done. And in this way, yeah, SDE can really help with bringing peace to the family home. But in order for that to happen, parents have to feel confident. And that's not always as easy as it sounds, especially if this is a new concept. It's much easier for parents to feel anxious, inadequate. So they have their own senses of competence that are being compromised. And that's really what we want to start tackling tonight. So let's have a look here at the questions that have come up here. So I'm just looking here. Okay, so my nearly 13-year-old loves playing Sims 4. She will do that most of the day if she can. She's very creative and creates amazing things. However, I'm struggling to believe she's learning, and not learning as in the academic sense. How much is enough? And this family is new to unschooling but loves the idea. So if you're very new to unschooling, you're probably in the stage that we call deschooling. And that applies to parents as well as kids. So if you think about, again, these concepts of autonomy, competence, and relatedness, when we've been in a situation where we aren't used to being autonomous, we're used to being told what to do, there's two different things that happen with that. The one is that we kind of get a bit of learned helplessness. We might start to think that we actually don't know what to do unless somebody is telling us. And we often see this, it's quite funny, for those of us who work a lot with self-directed education, to have people asking us questions that we then go and Google in 1 minute and then give them the answer. And we know full well they could have Googled it themselves, but they don't, because of that learned helplessness that school brings on. So that's the first thing to consider, is that any child who's been recently schooled might still have, and likely still has, quite a bit of learned helplessness. And any parent who went completely through the schooling system probably has quite a lot of learned helplessness, unless they've actually gone through a healing process around that. On the flip side of that, anytime our autonomy is compromised, we tend to feel a resentment of it. And it's a question of how consciously we feel that resentment. So we might feel rebellious, and we actually just waiting to break free. And this is what we see when people go, oh my gosh, how can you give children freedom? It's like the moment that you walk out of the classroom, there's absolute chaos. The moment that you tell a child that they don't have to do their schoolwork anymore, they will completely just binge on, whatever it is that is usually forbidden. Because as human beings, when the pressure is suddenly taken off, we burst out, right? It's like shaking up a champagne bottle and keeping the cork in, and then you let the cork pop, it goes psh. So this is also where we see, for example, the classic first year out of school is a high risk year for drugs, for alcohol, for pregnancy, because there's been so much control from the outside and no autonomy, and there hasn't been a growing into maturity. So when you suddenly let go of that control, there isn't an awareness of how to deal with that freedom responsibly. So during the deschooling process, you've got both of these forces working. You've got, on the one hand, a learned helplessness that says, yeah, but I don't know how to initiate things. So I'm going to rather do things that are sort of set out for me. It's much easier to respond to a game than to go and generate my own activity. And on the other hand, you've also got this rebelliousness and often a testing of the limits. If I'm going to tell you, you are now free to choose what to do with your time, are you going to believe me? Or are you going to test that? Well, what if I do this with all of my time? Am I still free? What if I do this with all of my time? Am I still free? When are you going to start telling me that enough is enough? So all of those things are happening during your deschooling, and that makes it very, very difficult to see what's really going on. On the other hand, I like to say that, anybody my age and down to about 30 probably is not a digital native. And we are prejudiced against anything that comes in a digital form. And it's hard for us to see how much somebody could actually be learning and how much they actually are doing. Especially when the relationship between the adult and the child, doesn't yet completely support the child's autonomy, and the child doesn't yet feel completely competent to run their own life and learning, and the relatedness between the adult and the child is still a little bit of a power struggle, so it's a compromised relatedness, then very often the best place to find a sense of full autonomy, easy competence, and relatedness with one's peers is going to be through an online peer game, an online multiplayer game. It's going to meet all three of those needs very, very clearly and very, very easily. And that's where you'll find a lot of kids running to video games, either the moment that they finish their homework if they're stuck in school, or the moment that they start deschooling if they escape from school, because it's a very quick win. So the tough part for the parent is, and yeah, self-directed education is heaven for children, and it's hell for parents until we've deschooled, and then it becomes heaven for us too. But it's hard. It's very anxiety provoking. So the tough part is that we have to take the long view, not the short view. We have to be ready to sit through some excess to get to the other side of that excess. We need to move into a position of having supportive, mutual conversations about what is going on, rather than dictating the rules about what will go on. And that can be quite a shift. And it can require the parent to do quite a lot of work with themselves on their own anxiety, and maybe also get some communication skills that we don't usually get in the school environment. So it's not on the one hand saying whatever you do is absolutely fine, no matter if it's unhealthy. On the other hand, it's saying, I trust you to find your way with this, even if it takes a bit of time. And I'm not leaving you alone to find your way with this. I'm right here with you and we can talk about it. But you're the one who's going to make the decisions in the end. You're the one with the power. I'm the assistant. And if you can really get that going on, it can change your lives. Does that help at all? Or which bits of the dilemma are still unclear or worrying, or what feels skeptical or anxious about what I've said? So yeah, in the question there is, but do I leave her? Yes, in a sense, I would suggest that you leave her. But not in a sense of you've abandoned her, because it's very easy to go, I can't handle this, I'm walking away, you do your damage to yourself for as long as you need it, I won't watch. It's easy to have that attitude, because again, we save ourselves pain that way. On the other hand, there's a very sweet and deep and tender pain to be had from sitting with somebody who's doing something, and you say, okay, you know, you're in charge of this, and I know that you will find your way, and I'm right here, and checking in and saying, how's it going? How was your day? And not how did you feel about your day, as in like, I'm expecting you to now understand and see that you wasted a lot of time, but sort of, how did you find your day? And to try and get into their shoes and see what it is that they are getting, so that you can genuinely appreciate what it is that she's getting out of it, because she is getting a lot out of it. And the more that you can accompany her and let her show you her journey, the more that you become a companion in there, the more that you're going to be a real resource and a support to her, so that she can sounding board you. I want to use an example from my own life, because there was a while when somebody in my life was going through a time where they were going to bed very, very late and wasting a lot of time in those late hours, just basically watching clickbait type videos. And they were saying, I don't know why I stayed up so late last night. I didn't mean to, and I regret it, and I just couldn't stop myself. And then the overwhelming urge as a parent is to say, well, okay, we've got to rescue you from this. I will help you. I will set alarms. I will come and force you to go to bed. I'll take over because you're clearly not managing. But all of that goes backwards again and prevents the deschooling from completing. So I had to go through a time of anxiety of going, but this person is not coping, this person's not managing, this person's not getting right, this person is messing up. And I had to say to myself, the rule of thumb. What's the rule of thumb? It's if this is going to need an emergency ward, if this is going to be permanent damage, then we really need to step in and think carefully what we're going to do. If this can be survived, or need the first aid box rather than the emergency ward, what's the problem? So I think this is where the critical insight comes, is that the schooled mind says that serious time can be lost. There are these windows that we need to make, and learning is this cumulative thing over time, that if you lose 6 months, you've lost everything. I was very, very interested to see, and his name has just slipped my mind, but one of our South African education academics from Stellenbosch University was interviewed the other day about the South African school year, because there's all sorts of things that are being suggested right now, like taking away all the holidays for the rest of the year, lengthening the school hours, making kids come back for evening classes, all of these horrific suggestions. And he was saying, no, just write off the school year. It's over. You're not going to get it back. Just move all the grade 1s in January to grade 2, in January. Just do that with everybody. Obviously, the matrics still have to write, but just reduce their exam to what you've managed to cover during the year and leave the rest of the exam out. And the news presenter was going, hang on a sec, but it can't be that easy. What about comprehension? And of course, this guy can't say what we all know to be true. If you've really studied learning and education and how children learn, you know that there is no problem writing off the school year, moving all the grade 1s to grade 2 and all the grade 10s to 11, because it's just content that they've lost. It's content they were going to lose anyway during the holiday. This is what they call the summer slide in America. Whatever was taught just before the summer is gone when they return from summer, because when kids are not interested in something, they don't retain what you teach them beyond the short term. They learn it just long enough for the test. And this is also ironically why parents think it's so hard to teach kids, because the parents don't understand the homework, because the parents don't make the connection that I learned the stuff at school and now I can't help my child. So therefore, did I learn it at school? No, you didn't. You retained it just long enough for the test, and your child will do the same. So there's not really much going on. And that's also why we see, when we compare the kids who've gone through a school curriculum with the kids who've gone lifelong SDE, when we look at the adult outcomes, we find that there's no advantage for the kids who went through the curriculum and the tests and the grades. They don't have any more likelihood of getting into tertiary, succeeding at tertiary, doing well in their careers. There's no advantage to the curriculum. So that's a big sigh of relief for being able to take that long view, is that if your child wants to spend, in some thoughts, waste, but spend, if your child wants to spend a year learning about wasting their time, they can afford it. And I only learned about wasting my time in my 40s. I only learned about prioritizing my life, and life is short and it's important to choose what matters to me, in my 40s. And I'm watching in SDE, I'm watching kids learn this at the age of 9, at the age of 14, and it's the most valuable lesson any human being can learn. So yeah, from that perspective, I would say there's nothing to lose by leaving her, and there's everything to gain by leaving her in a way that is not leaving her, but connecting with her and becoming part of her inner world, so that you really understand what she's doing, and she has the bliss of having a mum who understands her. She's about to go into her teens, And I can tell you what an absolute bliss it is for me to have a teenager who comes to me first when he wants some input, some advice, a perspective, he wants to reality check something, because we've got that relationship of trust and I'm inside his world and it's real. And when I look at, the relationships that are supposedly normal in the world between parents and teens, it's not that at all. Because again, if we come back to those 3 words that I'm just going to share one more time here, when parents are constantly trying to control a child, constantly giving the child the message that you're not competent to run your own life, and constantly in a power struggle, it undermines the relationship. And the child needs to then try and get a sense of autonomy by disobeying the parent and doing other than the parent says, and trying to prove their competence by getting a sense of competence through what their peers feed back to them, and getting a sense of related with their peers where there isn't a control relationship going on. So although on one hand we're just looking at self-directed education, in another sense we're really actually talking about your relationship with your child and what it can be, and this is your chance to actually build a different kind of relationship that can last for a lifetime. Okay, so we've got a few more things happening in the chat. I just want to catch up here. Okay, so we've tried several times on the SD philosophy, and each time we get back to where we started. They've been, okay, the anxiety is caused by them in front of the TV, and then we end up back in the place of putting in limits. So we end up saying no TV on these days. So I'm just also seeing this is interspersed with another one. Okay, so I'm going to just answer that one first and then come back to the question around when kids are asking for structure. Okay. So part of the question about the no TV, I think if you've missed some of what I'm saying, I don't want to repeat it because I think this is also going to be recorded. But it's very, very common for families to back out of self-directed education at that point when the kids are testing the limits most powerfully. So the suggestion to parents who are faced with that stage where they feel they can't sustain letting the kids just, for example, binge TV, is to have a look at the knowledge and the wisdom around addiction. That when there's really an addiction to something, so you want to protect your child because this is a real danger, right? If we look at addiction dynamics, it comes back again to autonomy, competence, and relatedness. When a human being has these three needs effectively met, they're not at risk for addiction. When these needs are compromised, they're at high risk for addiction. So the suggestion would be, instead of putting limits on the TV, rather work on building. How are you meeting their needs for autonomy? How are you allowing them to meet their needs for feeling competent? And remember, they don't have to be competent, they just have to feel competent. We have to feel good enough. It's not about some objective measure. It's about if we feel like we are effective in the world or we feel like we're just bumbling idiots. And how are you meeting their needs for relatedness? Because usually what I've seen is that if there's somebody who's looking pretty addicted to something, it's because those needs are not being effectively met. So, for example, it's easy to binge on TV to escape what's happening in the relationships in your house. Fix those relationships and there's suddenly no more binging. It's easy to binge on TV when that's the only way you can assert your autonomy because it's the one thing you're not allowed to do. So in order to feel like you have some control over your life, you're going to do the one thing that you know nobody wants you to do. And it's easy to binge on TV when you don't feel particularly competent when you do anything else, because you feel like you're not really that good at drawing, so you don't want to draw. You're not really quite sure how to find out how to do whatever it else is that you're interested in. So you do know how to switch on the TV, and you do know how to watch, and you maybe know how to crit the programs, and so you can feel safe doing that. So you reduce your anxiety by lowering your level of your aim. So that would be, firstly, again, for parents to let go of the stress of worrying about it. Take the long view. Are they still going to be alive if you let them watch TV nonstop the whole year? Yes. Will they have lost any crucial learning that they cannot make up? No. Can you risk it? Can you risk going with this a bit further and redirecting your attention to looking at their experiences of autonomy and competence and relatedness, and maybe having some really interesting conversations about that? Having conversations like, I've noticed that you're really enjoying this show. Can you tell me what's great about it? Can I watch it with you? Can I find out about it? What you're getting out of it, rather than assuming that watching this show is bad for you and I need to stop it because it's your 3rd hour of TV or your 16th hour of TV. Getting into their world and being able to be available as a partner, so that if they do have a problem, you're a resource to help them solve it. Okay. So there's just an important question here, and this is great. Thank you for bringing this up. Are we not ignoring the great seduction of technology when we only look at the addiction in terms of competence, relationship, relatedness, and autonomy? There is a seduction in technology, and that's not going to go away. Okay. Just like there is a physical addiction in many substances, and that's not going to go away. There's a great appeal in consumerism and wanting everything you see advertised and every glitzy thing you see in the shop, and that's not going to go away. Our kids have to learn how to deal with these things, and this is one of the biggest learning areas of our time. This is called curriculum. Humans who learn how to be the masters, as they say, you must either learn to program or be programmed. But that's not a literal sense. Not everybody has to be able to program a computer, but people have to be able to program their own lives. So if you want your kids to be empowered adults, they need to have their learning journey. And how much better is it to experience the great seduction of technology and come to master it yourself when you don't have to earn a living and you don't have to lose a job over it and you don't have to lose a marriage over it. I mean, I think of somebody I knew who got divorced over World of Warcraft. Yeah. I mean, probably not the only reason, but it was a major factor. How about getting that over with when you're 12 and not when you're in your 30s? While you have wise, loving parents in there to support you with it. So again, I would say that thinking that technology on its own at this point in human development has the power to get in and suck your kid's soul against all other odds, I haven't seen that. What I have seen is that it can cause disruption for quite a while, especially when those other needs are not being fully met. And I have seen that there can be a lasting difference in the values between the parent and the child around it. You might never be completely happy with how much your child is using technology, and that might just be a difference in values issue and a difference in generation issue. Because frankly, there's only really a couple of scenarios in our future. One of them is that our kids will have something like Neuralink, and they're going to be online and needing to be able to navigate floods of information that make today's option paralysis look ridiculous. Or they're going to need to know how to sharpen a stick. So I know which reality I'm working towards, and I don't think anything we do is going to help with the sharpened stick scenario. But I do believe that learning how to navigate these things for oneself in an empowered way rather than having a parent do it for one is going to be a great asset for the kids who are given the opportunity to do that. I do personally not believe in giving babies tablets, for example, and sticking babies in front of TVs. I think that, again, if we're going to be truly self-directed, we want to make technology available and leave it in the hands of the people who are going to engage with it. And generally when that's done, so yeah, babies don't have a choice about it. Tiny toddlers don't have a choice about it. They just, they will look at the stimulus that's there. Again, when we're going to offer, if you look at addiction again, if you have a rat in a cage on its own with a cocaine water dropper, it will be absolutely addicted. If you have a rat in a cage with many other rats and it's a big, interesting cage with plenty to do, they don't become addicted. So if you're going to talk about the great seduction of technology, how about the great addictive power of cocaine? If you are concerned about your child and the great seduction of technology, enrich the environment more. Make sure they have many, many social opportunities to experience relatedness. Make sure they have many, many tools of the culture to play with, not only the technological ones. Make sure that you are there with them, relating deeply, so that that is a deep satisfaction for relatedness, and that they can reach out to you if they are struggling with the great seduction of technology. And beyond that, there's really nothing to do but to trust that as great as the seduction of technology, greater is the call of whatever you want to call it, the soul, the spirit, the passion, the destiny, the individuality, the uniqueness is far more powerful than anything we've managed to create yet. And when we can trust that and support that, we will see who our kids really are. Okay, I would like to go a little bit here to the other end of the issues. We've got a family here being SDing for almost 3 years. Kids are asking for lessons, especially in maths, and ideas to facilitate that. So there's two different, very, very different things that can happen when kids start asking for lessons for things. The one is that we need to be sure that they're properly deschooled. It's very, very easy in a schooled world for kids to feel that they ought to be doing something schoolish because that's what they see happening in the world, and for their sense of competence to feel threatened by the fact that they're not doing the schoolish things. So the first thing to do is to make really, really sure, again, that we're meeting those needs, that they truly know that they are empowered, that they're not trying to please us by doing the thing they want us to have them want to do. And to try and help them really understand the value of all of the different things that they could be doing, that we're not artificially valuing some activities over others. Then if they are properly deschooled and the place of wanting formal lessons for a thing is really coming from a desire about that subject, then it's about sitting down with them to figure out how they want to meet that need. So what do they have in mind? What it is that they want to achieve, and how do they want to go about achieving it? Sometimes, especially with things like maths, kids want to play at doing the thing rather than do the thing, in which case just printing them off worksheets is plenty. If that's what they want, whatever the form is, getting them a maths app, getting them worksheets to do. Again, only they can tell you what it is that they will find satisfying. You want to give that autonomy as much power as possible. So go online with them, have a look around, see what's there, see what appeals to them. If they don't know why they want to do it, and they don't know what they want to achieve, and they don't know what resources they want to use, and they can't really choose between the different resources, you're probably looking at haven't deschooled properly yet, because they probably don't know what it is they're supposed to want. In which case, then I would focus on meeting those other needs and finding other things to do. But yeah, if they're able to point you at what they want, then go for it, because this is also something that is maybe sometimes a confusion in self-directed education, is it doesn't matter what's being used. It's perfectly possible to sign up to a formal curriculum and still be doing SDE. It's perfectly possible to go and sign up at a school. You could go to military school as part of your self-directed education. The point isn't what you're using. The point is who's in charge of choosing to use it. Is it truly what that person wants to do? So there's absolutely nothing wrong with signing them up for a Khan Academy maths course, or supporting them in signing themselves up for a Khan Academy's maths course, or getting them a tutor, or whatever. The critical thing is that they are absolutely free to drop it and opt out at any time. And if you see that they're, for example, not doing their homework or fiddling around, then you probably haven't found the resource that they're actually looking for, or again, they're actually doing this out of a lack of having properly deschooled. Yeah, so we've got a lovely comment here. Sometimes those questions come up because the mainstream voices become louder for the child, and they often ask what other people are asking. So it's important to have discussions with the child. Absolutely. This is where communication and relationship is the absolute heart of self-directed education. We sometimes have to literally say to kids, yes, kids out there think it's really important that you can do long division by the age of 12 because they've been told they're not good enough if they can't. We know differently. We know that it doesn't matter and you can learn it whenever, if you ever need to learn it. So this is something that you know that they don't know. Yeah. Aren't we lucky to be on the inside of this information? And if you want to do that right now, you can do that. If you want me to help you learn to do that, even if it is just to keep up with the neighbors, if that is a strong enough motivation for your child, that's a strong enough motivation. It's a completely valid motivation to want to feel socially competent in the mainstream society. And then go ahead and support them to do it. And often, I mean, I'm just thinking, I don't know if you guys all watched the Class Dismissed free screening the other day, but there was that lovely time when the eldest daughter, who was really interested in marine biology, decided she wanted to go back to high school. All her friends were at high school, and she was for a while thinking that, you know, she needs to go and get the high school diploma so that she can go to the university so that she can study the marine biology. And she came this close. And she had a few weeks to reflect on it. And then she realized, no, I've actually spent a year and a half building up this self-directed momentum. I've got this opportunity to volunteer at the Marine Biology Center. Why the heck would I go back to high school? And then she had the power to then choose that route, which is a much better route into a marine biology career than going and following a high school curriculum and wasting 3 years of your life on that, getting that piece of paper. So again, it's their process that they need to go through. So if they need to sign up for a maths class in order to find out that that wasn't what they wanted, that's fantastic. You haven't wasted anything. It's been a learning experience. Because again, if we look at school learning, we're looking at the marks you can get on a test in a subject. If we're looking at SDE, we're looking at your mastery of life and your learning about learning, because those are the things that endure, not the content. And if you have mastery of your life and you know how to learn and just discover and research and drive your life, you can always get whatever the content it is that you need at the time for as long as you need it. So it's a very, very different way of looking at learning goals and what's a good use of time. practical questions. How does one deal with things like bedtimes? What happens when they decide to run around screaming at 11 p.m. and stay up all night and build a fort, etc., etc.? Oh yeah, this happens. Okay. Free people are free, and different people have different biorhythms, and people experiment and explore, and why not? And I mean, if we look back at our ancestry, there were people who had to stay up in the middle of the night to stand watch, and many people have biorhythms that get them up before dawn to do their best work, and other people have biorhythms that keep them up until 3 a.m. to do their best work. And then we've got real life, and we've got relationships. So this is the critical thing, is to realize that everybody matters. And this is also where I like to say that self-directed education is about horizontal culture, not vertical culture. So in vertical culture, there's always somebody on the top telling everybody at the bottom what to do and enforcing their will on the people at the bottom. And in horizontal culture, we've always got people here figuring out how to live together in a way that works. And it's very, very easy to think, okay, so we used to have the adult on the top telling the child what to do, and the child had to suck it up. So now we're going to put the child on the top, and they can run around screaming at 11 when I want to go to sleep, and I'll have to suck it up. And that's not what SDE is about, and that's not what this way of life is about. We're looking for this. So we're looking for, okay, you want to stay up until 11 building your fort. I actually want to go to sleep. How do we solve this so we can meet both needs? If you can put yourself quietly to sleep at 11 without me, and you don't wake me up when I go to sleep at 10, what is the problem with you staying up and doing your fort? We can collaborate on creating a situation that actually meets everybody's needs. Now, what happens if we can't? What happens, for example, if you can't put yourself happily to bed at 11 because you're still scared of the dark and you don't want to put yourself to bed at 11? Well, I'm not willing to stay up till 11 because I'm going to be sleep deprived tomorrow. We have to find some other solution. But we're doing this as partners. We're doing this as communicating. We're doing this as collaborating. We're not doing this as, well, what you want is untenable for me, so now, pump, back we go, and I will now exert my dominant adult will. Because then again, what lesson are we learning? Every time we learn a lesson through coercion, all we learn is about coercion. We don't learn the rest of the lesson. Every time we learn a lesson that acknowledges our autonomy and our competence and our relatedness, we have a chance to actually learn the lesson. And at the same time, we're also learning about relatedness and about autonomy and about competence. So for example, if you look at DC and Ryan's work on this, they even found, for example, with doctors, that if your doctor treats you like a patient who knows nothing and must just do what they say and don't question them, and they don't have to explain it, and here's your medicine and take it, the chances of you still actually complying and taking your medicine are relatively small. So what they would do is they would actually phone up the patients a week later and get them to count their pills. And then they would correlate that with the doctor's relationship with the patient. And what they found is that the doctors who are going to say to you, okay, this is your body, this is your life, this is your choice, here's what I recommend, we could do it this way, we could do it that way, which way do you want to choose? So they're acknowledging your autonomy, your power of choice, they're acknowledging your competence to make a logical choice, they're making recommendations, they're not trying to shove it down your throat, and they actually take the time to connect to you a bit as a human being. You don't just feel that they're just trying to take your $500 for 15 minutes flat. You actually feel like maybe they remember your name, they know who the heck you are. So they're meeting that relatedness, that those are the doctors who are going to get the patients to comply. Those are going to be the patients who finish their course of medication and remember to take all their pills. So essentially, the moment that you're going to go back to trying to coerce somebody to do something that you think is for their own good and your own good, the results you're going to get are ironically not so great. You're either going to get sort of outright rebellion and power struggles, or depending on the temperament of the child, you might just get them going underground, which is where we say that very strict households are the quickest place for kids to learn how to lie, how to deceive, how to blame other people, how to cover their tracks, how to frame people, how to dodge and duck and dive and steal and all of the rest. Because they have to go underground to actually feel autonomous and competent. So that, yeah, this is where we open a whole thing. When we look at self-directed education, as I said, we're not talking just about learning. We're actually talking about an incredible opportunity to live a whole different kind and level of life and relationship. And it's totally foreign to most of us because, you know, we didn't grow up with that. We didn't get that as kids. And that's also where the deschooling process is important, because some of us maybe need to take time to grieve, sometimes to feel the pain of what we didn't get, and to be able to sometimes feel the anger about what we went through. And on the other side of all of that, we can find this amazing mutual empowerment. And if you look at what's happening right now with COVID-19, I think this is really the process that the whole world is going through. You know, we're going from a reality where, you know, everybody was just living the norm because it's the norm, because that's how it is, because that's how our culture is. And now we've got this disruption. And a lot of people are having a time to think, sometimes for the first time in their lives, and to reflect on what is actually necessary, what is essential, you know, what do we really need, what do we really want? And that's where, you know, if we play our cards right, we can actually emerge into something really quite wonderful and new on the other side of this. We can empower ourselves and build ourselves a new life, a new world. So are there any final questions? We're in the last few minutes of our hour. And maybe it's a good place to leave it there. But does anybody want to add any final thing? Okay, religious norms and rules. This is important. Hey, religious and cultural norms and rules. Again, immersion in those cultural norms and rules, together with autonomy, together with empowering, loving conversations about why this matters to you as the parent, have a much better ability to transmit those values to your child, and a much better chance of your child adopting those values as their own than coercion. Coercion of religious norms and rules are going to lead you either into rebellion or into faking it, and being obedient and compliant on the surface while not really internalizing things. Kids learn the lesson that is they learn. They either learn that this is a thing you do because you're forced to do it, or they learn that this is a thing that you do if you want to because it's valuable and it matters to you. So the same principle would still apply. If autonomy, competence, and relatedness are met in the realm of religious norms and principles, then you're more likely to have an adoption and an internalization of those values. If relatedness, competence, and autonomy are not met in that environment, then your child is much less likely to deeply adopt those values and take them on board long term. Last thing here, topic on building a new world. How do we use this COVID pause to do so? Yeah. And a comment on what I've just spoken about. We as parents can only model and speak about our own truths, why we value our traditions and culture. Yes, and if you have a real relationship with your kids, they're going to really hear you. If they feel you're trying to manipulate them, they're probably going to be more, well, not take it in as deeply. How can we use this COVID pause? I think it's an incredible time to deepen family relationships. One of the problems people have in normal life is finding the time to have the conversations, to read the material, to watch the stuff, to think and reflect, to grieve, to process, to do all of the things that go into deschooling. And this is an incredible blessing gift right now, to be given this time that you can actually use. Yeah, so I think this can be an incredible time. And there, to draw that together with the previous bit of conversation, I see another comment here: and become mindful of the rules that do go against autonomy. Yes, there's nothing more powerful you can do for your child than to be their partner when they need to stand up and rebel against something, whether it be big or small. If something is not fair, not just, not right, but it's merely a tradition or a culture or an unjust law, there's nothing more powerful to learn than that. Sometimes what we need to do is say, no, we won't go with the grain. Yes, we will stand out. And I think maybe this COVID pause is also the time to think deeply about that. When we come out of lockdown, will we just go back to exactly what we used to do? Right now, during lockdown, can we actually reach out and try to find a community that fits better with what our hearts really want? Can we think of ways to slowly restructure our lives, or create a 5-year plan, or maybe even an immediate change? What do we want to live? How do we want to live? Who do we want to live it with? And the more that we can broadcast to other people during this time, the better chance we have of finding the people that we are going to be dancing with on the other side of all of this. So with that, I think deschooling is not going to happen completely in lockdown because it's enforced. So some deschooling can happen in lockdown. I don't think many kids are going to go through a proper deschooling process during lockdown unless the parents are very mindful and really facilitate that. It's really when the kids have got the freedom to really choose what they're doing with their day, including being out there in the world or going to school or whatever, that we'll really see that. So thank you, everybody. And we will do this again. And when I say we, it's a big community, and we'll be doing it in many ways. There's groups popping up all the time now. This is also one of the richnesses of this time. There's a lot of new resources, new groups, new ways to connect. So if you go out there and have a look and find and make your tribe. So thank you. And depending on where you are in the world and when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, good night. And I wish you health and love.